Right now, in a freezer colder than any winter, there is a scrap of skin from an animal that no longer exists. Somewhere else, a foal's heart still holds liquid blood after 42,000 years in the dark. You think of extinction as a door that closes. Usually, it is. Usually, all that's left is bone, and even that crumbles. But these bodies didn't rot. The ice held them in the exact shape of their last living moment, and now people are trying to wake them. Today, we're looking at 6 frozen animals that scientists are actually trying to clone. For most of history, that would have been a fantasy. Extinction meant gone. A skeleton in a drawer, maybe a stuffed skin behind glass, and nothing you could ever bring back to breathing. But cold changes the rules. In permafrost, in a few museum jars, and in tanks of liquid nitrogen, a handful of dead animals kept something the rest of the dead lost: real tissue, real cells, sometimes even blood. And that changes what's possible. Start in the mountains of northern Spain in January of the year 2000. A park ranger walking the Pyrenees finds a wild goat lying dead in the snow, crushed under a fallen tree. That would be an ordinary tragedy, except for what this particular goat was. Her name was Celia, and she was the last Pyrenean ibex on Earth. A whole subspecies heavy, curved horns. A body built for cliffs, narrowed down over centuries of hunting to this single animal, and now to none. When the tree came down, the bucado went extinct. But a year earlier, someone had thought ahead. Scientists had caught Celia, fitted her with a radio collar, and clipped a small piece of skin from her ear. They froze that skin in liquid nitrogen and set it aside. So when she died, the species was gone from the mountains, but not from the freezer. In 2003, a team in Spain and France decided to use it. They took the DNA out of Celia's thawed skin cells and slipped it into ordinary goat eggs they had emptied of their own genetic material. They built more than 200 of these embryos. They implanted them into surrogate goats and ibex hybrids. 7 pregnancies took hold, 6 failed, 1 did not. And so, 3 years after the last bucado died under a tree, a bucado was born again. A living, breathing member of an extinct subspecies, delivered by cesarean section, her heart beating. For the first time, a human being had reached across extinction and pulled something back through. She lived about 10 minutes. One of her lungs had grown wrong, a solid, malformed lobe that could not move air, and no one could save her. The first animal ever brought back from extinction died in the hands of the people who made her, almost as soon as she arrived, which gave the Pyrenean ibex a distinction nothing else has ever earned. It is the only animal we know of to go extinct twice. That is the whole promise and the whole horror of this idea in one small body. A frozen scrap of skin really can become a heartbeat. The blueprint survives the cold. But a frozen cell is not a living cell, and the distance between the two is where everything goes wrong. Celia was only recently dead when they saved her skin. Everything else on this list had been lying in the ground, in the ice, for a length of time the human mind can barely hold. Go north to Yakutia in eastern Siberia, the coldest inhabited region on the planet, a place of frozen ground that never fully thaws. In the summers, men walk the riverbanks hunting for mammoth tusks to sell, and the melting mud keeps handing them things they did not expect. In 2017, and again in 2018, it handed them lions. Not lion bones, lions. 2 cubs, found in different years about 50 feet apart, each one curled up as if it had only just fallen asleep. They were cave lions, a species that hunted the Ice Age steppe and vanished tens of thousands of years ago. The cubs were named Sparta and Boris. Sparta is around 28,000 years old. Boris is older still, more than 43,000. Both were only 1 or 2 months old when they died. The preservation is almost impossible to believe. Their fur is intact, their skin, their teeth, their tiny clawed paws, their internal organs all there. Sparta's face still has its whiskers, and you can count them. Researchers have called her the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found, and looking at her, it is hard to argue. She does not look like a fossil. She looks like a kitten someone could warm back to life, if only the rules of death allowed it. They probably died fast. The leading guess is that a den collapsed, or a piece of frozen ground gave way, and buried them in an instant quick enough that nothing had time to decay. No predator, no rot, just cold closing over them mid-nap. That speed is exactly why they are so intact, and it is exactly what makes cloning them thinkable, because people have said out loud that they want to. A laboratory in South Korea, one that already clones people's pet dogs for money, announced years ago that it hoped to use Siberian cave lion tissue to bring the species back, working with Russian scientists through a joint lab set up in Yakutsk for exactly this kind of project. The idea is to find one undamaged cell in one of these frozen cubs and use a modern lion as the surrogate mother. They haven't done it. The obstacle is the same one that killed the Bukado's odds. Only worse, tens of thousands of years of freezing shatters DNA into fragments, and shattered DNA can't be cloned. But the cubs keep the ambition alive, because every time one of them comes out of the ground looking asleep, it is easy to believe the cell they need is in there somewhere. And these were small animals. The next thing out of the same ice weighed as much as a car. That one was a woolly rhinoceros. In 2014, in the Abiysky district of the same Siberian Republic, a local man found a frozen shape in a riverbank that turned out to be a baby, the only preserved infant woolly rhino ever discovered. They named it Sasha. It is roughly 34,000 years old. Woolly rhinos were tanks. 2 horns, the front one enormous and flattened for sweeping snow off the grass, a hump of fat and muscle across the shoulders, and a hide built for a world of ice. But Sasha died as a baby, and preserved as a baby. And when researchers reconstructed the coat from the frozen remains, it wasn't the dark, forbidding thing you would expect. It was a soft, strawberry blonde fleece, thick and almost golden. A 2-ton monster species, kept in the shape of a fuzzy calf. We don't know exactly how it died. Young animals in this landscape often mired in mud or drowned in a bog and were sealed before anything could touch them. What matters is what came out of the ice. Real skin, real hair, real tissue, from an animal that has been gone since the last ice age. And the woolly rhino sits on the same wish list as the cave lion. The same circle of Russian and South Korean scientists who talk about resurrecting the mammoth name, the woolly rhino, right alongside it, one of the Ice Age giants they would bring back if the cells cooperated. Sasha, and the handful of adult rhinos that have thawed out since, are where that tissue would have to come from. Here I have to be honest with you, because this is the point where the dream and the reality separate. Nobody has cloned a woolly rhino, and nobody is close. To clone anything, you need a cell whose nucleus still works a living, intact command center you can place into an egg and switch on. And from all of this, the lions, the rhino, every gorgeous, whisker-perfect body the permafrost has surrendered, no one has yet found a single one. The bodies look alive. At the level that actually matters, the level of the cell, they are as dead as any skeleton. For years, that was the wall. Beautiful corpses, no living cells, no way through. And then a body older than all of them, a small one, came out of a crater in the ground with something inside it that no one had ever seen before in remains that ancient. Not intact cells, something stranger than that. In August of 2018, tusk hunters were working the Batagaika crater, a vast gash in the Siberian permafrost that locals call the gateway to the underworld kilometer-wide pit that keeps growing as the frozen ground collapses inward and slumps away. Down in that thawing wall, they found a foal, a baby horse, 1 or 2 weeks old when it died, belonging to an extinct type called the leaner horse. It is about 42,000 years old. It is almost perfect. A bay-colored body, a black mane and tail, the fine hair still on its legs and head, the hooves intact, the internal organs preserved. It went into the ground as a newborn and stayed a newborn for 42,000 years. The best reconstruction of its death is a familiar one for this landscape. It drowned, probably in mud, and the cold took it before decay could start. Then the researchers opened it up and found the thing that made this foal famous. Inside the vessels of its heart, there was still liquid blood, not dried residue, not a stain. Dark, 42,000-year-old liquid, drawn out into tubes, some of the oldest liquid blood ever recovered from anything on Earth. For the team that found it, blood meant hope. If any cell in this animal could still be coaxed to live, they might finally have their surrogate-ready nucleus, and the same South Korean cloning lab, partnered with the university in Yakutsk, set out to try. Over the course of about a month, they cultured tissue from the foal more than 20 separate times, trying to get a single cell to grow, to divide, to show any sign that it was still capable of life. Every attempt failed. Every one. The blood itself was a dead end, almost by definition. Mature blood cells in a horse carry no nucleus, no DNA to clone from, and the other tissues, for all their eerie freshness, would not wake up. The lead scientist, holding in his hands the best preserved young horse in the world and its own liquid blood, admitted the cells they needed might simply not be there anymore. Think about what that means. They had the body, they had the blood, they had the technology that had already made a clone of an extinct goat, and it still was not enough, because 42,000 years is longer than a cell can keep its promise. That is the frustration humming under this entire field. Meanwhile, in a country that never freezes, in a museum cupboard, a different kind of specimen was quietly giving up something the frozen bodies never had. A researcher in Melbourne, Australia, opened a cabinet at a museum and found a head sitting in a bucket of ethanol. Just a head, the skin stripped away, dumped in preserving fluid and forgotten at the back of a cupboard for about 110 years. It belonged to a thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, the striped, dog-shaped marsupial predator that once hunted across Australia and Tasmania. And here is where I have to break the pattern, because this one was never frozen at all. No permafrost, no ice, no crater, alcohol, a glass jar, and a shelf. But it belongs on this list, because it is one of the most serious attempts to reverse an extinction happening anywhere in the world right now, and because of what that pickled head still held. The last thylacine died in 1936 in a zoo in Hobart, reportedly shut out of its shelter on a cold night and left exposed. We drove the species to the edge with bounties and bullets, and then let the final one die of neglect. For decades, it was simply gone. Then scientists went back into that jar of ethanol, into the tongue and the brain and the eye tissue, and pulled out not just DNA, but RNA, the fragile, short-lived molecule that records which genes an animal was actually using, how its body was switching itself on and off. RNA almost never survives. Recovering it from a century-old head was like finding not just the blueprint of the animal, but a snapshot of it in the very act of being alive. A company called Colossal Biosciences, working with an Australian lab, is now using that genetic haul to try to rebuild the thylacine. They say they have assembled a genome that is more than 99% complete, with only a few dozen gaps left, though that work has not yet been fully published and checked by outside scientists. The plan is not to clone the head directly, but to take the thylacines' closest living relative, a mouse-sized marsupial called the fat-tailed dunnart, and edit that little animal's DNA gene by gene, until it can carry and give birth to something that is, for all practical purposes, a Tasmanian tiger. A cousin the size of your palm, rewritten to bring back a predator. If a forgotten head in a bucket can become a blueprint that detailed, then you can imagine what a company with hundreds of millions of dollars is attempting with the most famous frozen animal of all, the one that still, sometimes, appears to bleed. The woolly mammoth is the animal this entire dream is really about. In 2010, on the coast of northern Siberia, researchers recovered a young female mammoth they named Yucca, roughly 28,000 years old, with auburn hair still clinging to her hide and her flesh, so well kept that when scientists worked on frozen mammoths from around this period, dark blood is said to have seeped out of the ice. These are not skeletons. These are bodies with hair and fat and marrow. In 2019, a team at a Japanese university tried to see whether anything in Yucca was still capable of stirring. They took cell nuclei from her muscle tissue and injected them into the egg cells of living mice, then watched under the microscope, and something happened. In a few of the eggs, the ancient mammoth nuclei began to gather structures around themselves, spindle-like fibers, the very machinery a cell assembles right before it divides. For a moment, 28,000-year-old material behaved as though it remembered how to live. It never actually divided. It never became an embryo. The DNA was too broken to finish the act, and the scientists said plainly that they still had a long, long way to go. The man who had chased this dream for decades and helped lead the work was 90 years old when those faint signals flickered across the screen. But something in Yucca moved, and that was more than anyone expected from a corpse that old. That partial flicker is not how the mammoth will actually come back, if it does. The real effort now runs out of a company in Texas, Colossal Biosciences again, backed by a founding geneticist from Harvard and hundreds of millions of dollars. They are not waiting for a perfect frozen cell. They are taking the Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative, more than 99% genetically identical, and editing its cells to carry the mammoth's key traits: the shaggy coat, the thick fat, the cold adapted blood. They have already produced mice engineered with mammoth-like fur to prove the edits work. And they have said, out loud and on a schedule, that they intend to have the first calves walking by 2028. Sit with that date for a second. Not could, someday, in theory. A stated deadline for reversing an extinction that happened 4,000 years ago, for putting a version of the woolly mammoth back onto the tundra within a couple of years of right now. The frozen bodies in the ice may never give up the living cell, but they gave us the map, and the map may be enough. Here is the part that should stay with you. Almost none of these bodies were found by scientists searching for them. They were found by accident by men hosing down frozen ground for mammoth tusks, by a crater eating its way deeper into the permafrost, by a head somebody shoved in a cupboard and forgot. And the ground that hid them is thawing faster every single year, opening up and handing us more of the dead each season than the one before. There are more of them down there, frozen mid-step, mid-breath, mid-sleep, waiting. The question is no longer only whether we can wake them, it is what we will owe them once we do. If bodies coming back out of the ice unsettle you the way they unsettle me, stay with the channel. There is a lot more still frozen down there, and it is starting to melt.